Hey, Tom. Thinking about a question that a lot of people have asked me and that I've also asked myself. And that question is, how can we get apologetics into local churches? Why is it so hard? What are we doing wrong? What can we do? And today I thought maybe that would just be a good way to kick off what we have to discuss.
It would be. Actually, we tried this last Thursday, didn't we, at my house? And we're doing it remotely now. That was a crazy day, wasn't it?
That was an insane couple of days, actually. But talk
Yeah,
about how not to do a podcast in 5 easy steps.
yeah, but it was weird. Like we were going to record using our respective earbuds, and my AirPods failed for the first time ever. They started working later in the day. The internet failed, and we were using the internet for recording basis there, and it just kind of turned on about the same time the people from Spectrum came to fix it. We had something else that went wrong that day with audio. It was the weirdest thing. It was kind of like how not to do a podcast on getting apologetics in your church or something like that. So we're
Right. When everything works when you're testing it and then you actually do it and it turns out to be useless.
oh yeah,
That
that's what
is
it was.
that's
We
terrible.
Yeah, we tested it and it sounded great, but then my
Yeah.
voice had this horrible echo on it that was made it completely unusable. And that was after we ran our whole
Yeah.
discussion. So we're giving it another shot, planning to have some fun with it. That and maybe even more fun than last time. But the question
For
is,
certain values of fun, yes.
that's right. That was quite the experience. At least we had some good time together. Having you here was great, and I loved it. So here we are in our respective locations. I'm Tom Gilson, by the way. I'm in Dayton, Ohio, and I have been a writer with the Stream, senior editor there. I've written several books, most recently Too Good to Be False, How Jesus' Incomparable Character Reveals His Reality. And I have a passion for not just apologetics, but for the ministry of apologetics in the local church. And so Tim has just a passion for apologetics and ministry too, if you want to just introduce yourself.
I'm Tim McGrew. I'm a professor at Western Michigan University. I teach philosophy there, have lived there for decades. And Tom and I have spoken at many of the same conferences in person together. And that has been just some of the most fun that I've ever had doing ministry, just walking in and doing what we've come to call the Tom and Tim show. So we're trying it now remotely to see what we can do with that and see if we can bring a little bit of that to you and let you sort of have a window on what our discussions are like.
Right. And it always tends to be kind of spontaneous. So that's half the fun. But the question is apologetics in the church. And, I've been watching that question on, in discussions at conferences, on apologetics Facebook groups for years and years. And I don't see us making enough progress. We're making some. And I think the apologetics movement is growing. Boy, it's really growing here in the Dayton area. We've had an enormous number of conferences. We've got small groups meeting. It's been great. But it's still not entirely at all integrated into the church, which is where Christians are, where people have questions, where people have needs, and where in my conversations with people, these needs, these questions are going unmet. Questions are the kinds of things that apologists could answer. And even as I say that, I'm thinking it's really not a matter so much of, quote, apologetics. It's about questions, which is a less scary word than apologetics too, by the way.
Yeah, to put it maybe the same point slightly differently, it's about the questions that are being asked and from the defensive side about the accusations that are being leveled. And it might or might not correspond to what you thought apologetics was. But if you look at the history of apologetics, if you go back to the 2nd century, you read some of the earliest Christian apologies, you find that they are answering objections that are very much like the ones that are being leveled against Christianity now. And your multi-level argument for the resurrection of Jesus, be it ever so good, may actually not be to the point. It may be an argument that's directed against questions that aren't or aren't yet being asked because other questions have come crowding in and gotten in the way.
Right. And it's not that the resurrection truth is irrelevant by any means. It's just that when a person is asking the question, why is Christianity so bigoted? The resurrection isn't the answer. It's a much more complicated question. Actually, we are in a world now where the question is less about is Christianity true, but is Christianity good? And why would I want to hang around with those awful people as we've been reputed to become?
So I guess you could say that in some measure, it's a messaging or a branding or almost an advertising issue. Christians have the reputation, I think almost always very unjustly, of being hateful people who just want to subjugate women and just make the world more miserable. They're definitely down on sex. I have no idea where these people think little Christians come from, right? Presumably from grown-up Christians grimly doing their duty. But this is just an odd situation to be in. And if you grew up, as I did in the 1980s, reading the books on the apologetics section of the library shelf, nobody even talked about those questions under the heading of apologetics. There was some cultural engagement. I think Francis Schaeffer maybe was a good example of someone who was trying to keep a finger on the pulse. But the debates that got made into books about debates and the handbooks for training us just did not touch on that. And boy, has that rabbit hole turned into a sinkhole and swallowed us in our times. Just over the past 6 or 7 years, I have had the feeling that I'm on a roller coaster and suddenly I look down and the track just vanishes and we're just going to go sailing off into space and crash. It's been almost a terrifying ride there.
It has been. And the way I think about it, I've been to churches where there's a sign on the exit over the door as you leave, or maybe at the parking lot as you're leaving the parking lot that says, you are now entering the mission field. And that's a good sign. That's a good message to send to the people of the church. But it needs to be changed now. That sign needs to now read, you are now entering the, insert the word, foreign mission field. The world has turned foreign around us. We used to live in a world where the Christian faith was regarded with generally positive approval. And it's like, well, I don't go to church. I know I should, but I don't, but I don't. And that's how I remember it. I remember in college sitting in a Bible study in a dorm room thinking about persecution of believers in Russia and saying, could it ever happen in America? And the answer was theoretically, yes, but no, we cannot imagine it. You can discuss whether Christians are actually being persecuted now in America, but it's no longer difficult to imagine it. That time has arrived.
Some of them, I think, clearly are, right? Yes. We all know the story about the cave, right? And this guy is still being sued. Every time he wins in court, somebody launches another suit against him. In fact, I think he's being pursued by just one attorney primarily who's trying again and again and again to try some different angle on it and basically waste and ruin Jack's life. So even if I do not find that people are breaking my windows because of my faith, there are people who are definitely taking a hit in ways that I am not. And that's hard. That's really hard.
And Jesus said at the end of the Beatitudes, blessed are you when men revile you and persecute you and say all manner of evil against you falsely on account of my name. He's putting persecution in the middle of revival and saying evil things. It's kind of on the same level almost. I can't prove he means it's on the same level, but it's It's certainly in that same neighborhood, and it's happening in America. But the world has turned so foreign, and it's not just their people's attitudes towards Christianity; it's their attitudes towards reality. That
Yeah.
it used to be that we were living in a world where everyone kind of believed in a God, and I suppose people maybe believe in a higher power now, but a lot of the times, no. It's an expressive. The higher power is me. I decide who I am, my identity, my fate, my reality. I am the God of my own universe because I decide all of this for myself, and you must accept it. Now, just as an aside, that's kind of a rough place to be because, and I don't know that I see the full attraction of it, because if you are the God of your own universe and everybody else is a God of their own universe, you are each absolutely supreme and absolutely the only living inhabitant where you live. You have
This
created your own universe and nobody else lives there, and you have to be very careful how you touch and bump into other universes.
Well, just remind me of the Calvin and Hobbs strip, uh, where one of the characters says, "There's a great big wonderful universe out there," and the other one says, "I hope it doesn't collide with ours."
Yeah, right. And
So,
and
yeah,
there is um, the idea is in most of culture today is either something like atheistic materialism, that there is no God, or something more like a spiritualism, panpsychism, or rather pantheism or panentheism, that says that God is impersonal and everywhere and in everything, or something like that. But the idea of a personal God who has created us, who is sovereign over us, who loves us, and so but he has the right to rule. He rules lovingly. But the idea of that is completely anathema in our culture. And what that means for Christians is that we live in a foreign land.
right. We've moved from Christianity's being viewed as a net positive by many people to it's being so mixed up that you really would be hard pressed to say whether it was positive or negative, to where we've come now, where people who don't themselves think of themselves as Christians, and fairly traditional Christians at that, tend to view Christianity as, on the whole, a negative thing, sometimes a striking, startling negative that is the source of all evils. And this idea of sovereignty, this idea of God as someone to whom we owe our allegiance, is the absolute antithesis of expressive individualism. It is
It
the
is.
anathema, and you see in expressive individualism all the components that the Supreme Court would require for a religion. It's a set of beliefs and practices that induce in you a set of moral obligations so that you feel certain things are obligatory and other things are impermissible. That is definitely a case where it's worldview on a very broad scale. And I think we might profitably think of it as a religion, which is terrifying. Because, as you say, if it's a religion, each person in there is a religious believer with one God. In his book on the morals of the Catholic religion, St. Augustine asks the question early on, what is the good for man? And as he's approaching the question, he says, it had better be something higher than ourselves. Otherwise, we cannot rise above where we are now by reaching for the good.
Right.
It's something that does us no good at all. It leaves us right where we were. And that would be a really sad place to be.
And it is a sad world. We are overwhelmed with loneliness,
Yeah.
depression, mental health problems. It's having its effect. Oh, and by the way, we're using this word expressive individualism. If it's unfamiliar to you, Carl Trueman's book, Strange New World, or his more um, higher level book, I guess, on the topic, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, is brilliant on this. And it's basically the idea that we've already been saying that I'm in charge of my reality. And it's my job, it's virtually my moral duty to be who I am. And first to decide who I am and then be that person. But, in terms of apologetics, what does this mean? It's one thing that I've noticed about this and other issues like critical theory, like the fact that everything has become political, sexuality, the complications around that's the word. The word is complications. The world has become unbelievably complicated. I've done studies on critical theory, and I have tried to wrap it down to something like an understandable summary, and it is not terribly easy to do. Plus, I have to stop this thing that's ringing next to me here.
We go again.
Yep, that's right. It is not easy to do, and I think it's the more I think about the way the world is that it's become incredibly bewildering to Christians. Why do people think that? How could they think they can choose their gender? Or what am I missing? Are they right and I'm wrong? It's just like, this is just confusing.
And once you enter that labyrinth, it's very difficult unless you have a guiding thread to pull on to take you through it. Very, very difficult to find your way to some point of understanding. Part of the difficulty is that words that have normal, established meanings that we all grew up with, that were accepted by people across the American political spectrum, things that had been in place for centuries, maybe millennia, suddenly those words are being used and there are completely different things being meant by them. We're not talking about highfalutin philosophical or theological terminology. We're talking about things like man, woman, marriage, love. And these are words that bring concepts so fundamental that they are woven into the basis of civilization. When you pull the plug on that, when you start redefining those terms and then insisting that everybody agree with your redefinitions of them, people are naturally bewildered. Like, what in the world is going on? I like your comment about the sign. I think maybe actually we should take that sign at the door of the church, and we should not only write, "You are now entering the foreign mission field," but we should leave the other side showing, put it up against glass and leave it showing on both sides so that when you're entering the church, you're entering the mission field.
Yeah,
there are people there who are getting bombarded at work with DEI training. They are being pressured to put stickers on their doors to show their solidarity with things that sometimes they don't even understand, and they have an uneasy feeling that if they did understand them, they probably wouldn't agree with them. But the pressures are very real. And these are questions that are being asked inside the churches. One of the things I found most bewildering when I began trying to do apologetics ministry was I was set with the traditional set of, oh, you want to know whether there's a God? You are bothered by the problem of evil. Hey, we can have a talk about that. I understand how that goes. I know the moves that can be made. You want to talk about soul-making theodicies, Irenaean kinds of things. You want to talk about a free will theodicy. I was down with that. And then people would ask me questions that were completely off my pay scale, that I had not been prepared for, and frankly, that I did not see coming. I got blindsided, not just once, but over and over. And that is what kind of shook me into the realization. This is a new conversation, and it's not good enough to be armed with the previous millennium's weapons and to be coming into it with that. Those aren't, you can't bring a bow and arrow to a nuclear war. It just doesn't, it's not effective.
And, to kind of sum up what you're saying there too, is that it's not about our questions. It's not about what we've studied. It's about their questions and their needs. And it's probably, I think, also about the bewilderment that's been foisted upon us. by all these messaging, all the changing meanings assigned to words. And so if we come in to the church saying we have apologetics to offer, first of all, that word is going to be hard
Right. What does
to
it
get
even mean?
across. Who cares?
Sure.
And if the pastor knows what it means, there's actually reason for a pastor to be cautious about that, because apologetics means different things to different people. Can I trust this person to teach? Things like that. But if we come in to a church saying, I've studied these things, and really the field of apologetics could be described as the field of people who are less bewildered. We have
somewhat less
studied these
bewildered,
things,
yeah.
somewhat less bewildered. There's still a lot to be confused over.
Sure.
Less bewildered. But I have, because of my study, I have a kind of an idea where the gender movement came from, what its goals are, what it's about. I have somewhat of an idea of critical race or critical theory in general, where it came from and what its goals are, what it's trying to accomplish. And those are just two examples where I am still, there's still an awful lot to learn on both of those, but I've had some experience becoming less confused, a bit more informed. And my thought is that if we could go to people with questions, or rather with people who have questions about these kinds of things, and just be available to sit down with them, maybe one-on-one or in a teaching session, and just say, let's see if we can help this make more sense. We are living in a foreign land. If a missionary goes to a foreign land, he's got to learn the culture, taboos, the customs, the stories, the language, which is not the same, the religion, the dreams, the ideals, the aspirations. Missionary has to know all those things in order to effectively minister in a new culture. The missionary also needs to have an incredibly strong grip, try to say both words at once, on the gospel, on the teachings of the Bible, and on who God is, and be able to take the message of the Bible and bring it together in a way that communicates, that answers the questions, and maybe helps explain some of their questions, stories, and so on. We, I think, as apologists, could help with the service of helping understand what's going on out there. That doesn't make us the ministers. It's just people who can, as you said earlier, be kind of a, what was the word, a roadmap or something that you used, Tim?
Read through the labyrinth.
Yeah, right.
Right.
But it has to be in a service mode, because otherwise we're going to probably go in there answering questions that no one is asking, and being awkward and clumsy and annoying about it.
To do that requires that you develop a skill that can be learned, but is maybe not a skill that we've prioritized in trying to teach people apologetics, and that's the skill of really effective listening. Not the kind of listening that is sort of discarding all evaluation and judgment, but the kind of listening that tries to get down to the bottom and say, what really are the questions here? Where is this person coming from? What are the issues? Trying to get to the point where you could restate the questions or the problems in terms that the person you're speaking with will recognize.
Right.
That's a skill that can be learned, but it is a skill we don't talk about enough, and we don't spend enough time developing it. And it might be worth or maybe doing a separate podcast where we just play some clips and then try to analyze, what did we hear going on there? What did we hear? What would that mean? Where is this person asking questions? Where is this person maybe internalizing faulty assumptions that would have to, in their own way, be questioned? When Jesus engages with people in the Gospels, as we've said to one another before, very frequently, he answers a question by asking a question. And the questions he asks go to the heart of the issue and sometimes reveal that there's something going on under the surface. Now, Jesus is very good at this, and some of us not so much. We might just come
Oh,
across as sarcastic or overbearing if we were to adopt that without having developed the skill first. But I think it's a good thing to think about, that we maybe need to practice doing that in order to be more effective. But I know there's more to be said here about effective ministry in the churches, and let's talk about this from a pastor's point of view. What does a pastor see that maybe we, walking in from the outside, don't see, or don't see as clearly as we need to?
probably almost everything, except for maybe these points of bewilderment. And so along with your skill of listening, question asking, another skill that I think is going to be absolutely crucial for apologetics in the church is building relationships.
Yeah.
And if you're going to, and relationships appropriate to the level at which you want to have some kind of impact. If you want to be an apologetics teacher in a church, I sat down once with a pastor who's actually a pastor of pastors. He was he had 100 churches in this region that he was not in charge of. This is in the Baptist denomination where they're not in charge, but he was there as their minister. And we were talking, and we sat down. I bought him lunch, and I just started out by saying, "Tell me your story. Just tell me your story." And I listened. And then I brought it around to my interest in apologetics, and we talked about it a little bit more in that area, but it was mostly listening. And then I said to him, Steve, what would it take for me to get into, what does it take for me to get into a church and have the opportunity to teach apologetics? And he did this back and forth, waving at me and himself and the table. Lunch together.
Right. What we're doing right now. Yeah.
What we're doing right now. And so it was this sense of, you have to be a real person. You can't be a real apologist. You can't argue a pastor into liking arguments. That is
Darn.
just, what do we call it? Performative contradiction or something like that,
Right.
in a way. And so I think that the missing link for a whole lot of apologetics in the church is people taking the time. Brett Kunkel, very prominent apologist, told me that the way he got started in apologetics teaching in his church was by teaching with his wife a class of 2-year-olds. I hope, Brett, it's okay I mentioned that. And so it's, how do you get a ministry? How do you get any ministry started in a church? How do you start a basketball league? How do you start an Awana group or whatever it may fit your church's flavor? How do you do that? Well, you have to be someone that they know and trust. And just because we come in there with this head full of knowledge doesn't make us qualified to be ministering in the church. It just doesn't. Or if we are qualified, so what? They're not going to put us in ministry anyway.
But Tom, we feel so qualified.
Yeah.
You're telling me
right.
facts don't care about my feelings?
But okay, you feel qualified. Make yourself available. Someone
Right.
says, my daughter is drifting off into New Age. Say, let's go have lunch. I'll listen to
Yeah.
your story. Might have some things to share. Make yourself available, and expect it to be slow. This kind of ministry that ministry is not fast. It's not easy, to rush something.
One of the ways in which it's not easy has to do with that entry into the mission field when you're coming into the church. Because honestly, serious discussions that come around to biblical answers will sometimes make people inside the church unhappy. It is not necessarily something where you can just assume, oh, once they get it, once I explain it, they'll be on board. You may offend them, or you may be asking something of them that they're terrified to give to you. Right. The story of the rich young ruler comes to mind, where he says, oh, no, I've done all this from my youth. Jesus says to him, just one more thing. Sell everything you have. Give it to the poor and follow me. And he goes away sorrowing, That's the one thing he hadn't done yet. Well, what if you have to tell somebody, I don't think you can, in good conscience as a Christian, say the things that your boss is telling you you have to say to keep your job.
Or I
Think
do
about the
not think you can, in
consequences.
good conscience, say it is right for your son to marry another man.
Right.
That's even harder. And
Even if
my
you still
goodness,
love your son, yeah.
you can still love, yes.
Yeah.
But this is tough. These things are tough. And I think of the pastor. I think of apologetics ought to be service. It really ought to be there to help. And my goodness, we are good at one thing, being less bewildered about some things. The pastor's job, the ministry job of the entire church is so much more. It
Right.
is counseling, it is marriages, it is births and deaths, it is teaching the whole gospel, it is managing chairs and 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 logistics and budgets, and it's so much more. And the I would do this. I had an experience once where I would do this again for the entertainment effect. I was leading, I was leading a session. I was part of a ministerial group in Williamsburg, Virginia, a bunch of pastors mostly, and some parachurch people like me. And we had a lot of people. There was a lot of interest in that group in culture and apologetics. I was really proud of them. So I said, I have some apologist friends. We could bring them in for a day or two session together. And would you enjoy that? And they said, oh, yeah. So I called in some people from Southern Evangelical Seminary who were friends, and they agreed to come, and from Breakpoint and elsewhere. And I got to lead the session because I knew everyone there. And I stood up, and this was so fun. I said, it was all men in the room. I said, gentlemen, we are gathered here as people in ministry to listen to the experts. Pastors, you are the experts. Apologists, we need to listen. Well, the fun part was the pastors went, their head snapped. They weren't expecting me to say that. But I honestly see them as the experts in ministry, or they're developing expertise. And we are experts in a slice of it. We should be experts in that slice, but we have to humbly accept the fact that they know more than we do about ministry.
Right. They know which people are going to get in a huff and close their checkbooks if you start discussing certain issues.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't know that.
And what if you are suggesting the church change? I'm going to say something here at which I'm going to lose all credibility among pastors until I correct myself. Changing a church is difficult. Okay, half of you have written me off. Changing a church is impossible. Almost. It's just it's really difficult. We've never seven last words of the church. We've never done it that way before. And if we are going to become a church in America, if your church is going to become a church that is taking seriously the fact that it's not just going out into the mission field, but into the foreign mission field, that means changing some things. It means changing the way you teach some things, changing the way you prepare people for ministry on the job or at school or wherever. It means maybe putting in a new class. It might mean bumping somebody else's class. This is not just, okay, do it. We as apologists have to recognize that what we offer is incredibly important. It is incredibly helpful to help people become less bewildered, but it's not the only thing going on. And there's a lot of other forces in a church.
I just add one rider to that, which is you're completely right that there are things that need to change, and that starts with sometimes our own approach to what needs to change. However, not everybody who comes saying your church must change is telling the truth or is on the side of truth.
Oh, right.
And
yeah.
so this is something that can be weaponized, and pastors who hear us saying, you're probably going to need to change some things, they are right to be reluctant to write us a blank check. They're right to say, well, now wait a minute, let's talk. Which things did you have in mind, and how well do you know my church? And so we should be aware that there are wolves in sheep's clothing as well who come around saying your church must change. If you're not doing things your church is uncomfortable with, you're not doing it right. Well, which things? And what kind of discomfort? And where's our touchstone? Can we go back to scripture and talk about the grounding of all of this in a worldview that is thoroughly biblical? Or you're just sounding like somebody inviting the church to go off a cliff.
Right. And I think maybe back again, it circles back around to this so often. It comes back to questions that the church near here, just a couple miles from where I live, mega church, they several weeks ago, they did, I was actually thinking of building a survey for this, but they came up with it so much easier. They said, email us your questions. And they went through a lot of emails and they found 8 basic kinds of questions that people were asking about the Bible and resurrection, about sexuality, and then they addressed them. And that was a kind of a change that I think was really helpful for that church. It certainly brought those questions into the center of discussion. Those questions were there. The questions were there. But they needed to be brought into the center of discussion. They brought Christopher Yuan in to do the talk on sexuality because he's more of an expert than many other people, certainly locally here. And it was great. So I think, plus, one way to incite change, one reason people change, perhaps the most important reason people change, is because of pain. Is because something's not working, something's not comfortable. And if questions are brought to the surface, that's bringing those some actual pain points to the surface and saying, we can deal with this. So I would say, again, just as we as apologists need to ask questions, we can help churches ask questions, or we can help them process questions or something like that. But again, help. And they are the people that we are there to minister with and to serve and to be humbly serving alongside of.
Did this church that compiled the questions and found 8 basic themes running through it, did they publish the list of the 8 themes? Did they put that out there?
There's 8 sermons.
It would be a great idea if we could, maybe in some notes appended to this video, just list out what the questions were or the themes were that people were asking about. They might be similar to what people are asking in other places, maybe sometimes differently. But when you made the comment about pain, I thought of some of my experiences speaking in churches. And I would say that overwhelmingly, the most pain that I have found in churches, the most people who are clearly in pain and sometimes willing to talk about it, have been parents who are grieving over their children and don't understand why this happened. They tried to do everything right. They can't believe some of the things their kids are saying, and they're bewildered to the point of agony.
Right.
I think that thinking about that and thinking pastorally about that, you're addressing questions and talking about issues, but you are dealing with people who are just hurting about their children.
Yeah.
That's a really important thing to have in mind.
And we are not talking, as you say that, we are not talking about inducing pain. The pain is there. We're just talking about addressing it. And you know what? In motivational theories, I've studied psychology and these things. There's 2 key things, actually 3. I'm going to have trouble remembering the third, but there's 2 key things that will make a difference in whether someone is motivated to start a new thing or to pursue a project or whatever, like answering questions in the church. One of them is a sense that it's valuable, that if I could make that, if improvement could somehow be made, very broadly speaking, if this could be improved, it would be good. So there's a sense of value to it. The second one is competence. If I can do it, then I might be motivated to do it. I think it would be great to have world peace. That's beyond me.
Why not?
And I am not on a mission for world peace.
Right.
Because that's just beyond my competence to address. I think that it might just be the case that for some teachers, pastors, parents, the reason they're not addressing this pain isn't because they don't recognize it would be valuable, but it's like, what would I do? And if we can help with that too, just say, if you've got that question, let's go have lunch. I'll listen. Notice I didn't say, if you have that question, I have the wisdom. If you have that question, let's go have lunch. I'll listen. And don't back down too far. I have studied this. I might have something that you would find helpful. Something on it. And you have to tailor that to your knowledge of the pastor and your relationship. I've had pastoral relationships where I could say, oh, look, I've studied that. Let me just talk with the person. I've had that kind of relationship. But we're talking about introducing it into the church, and you might not be there yet.
Francis Schaeffer was once asked if you had only 1 hour to speak to someone who's not a Christian, how would you use the hour? And as I heard the story, he replied, it'd probably take 55 minutes to listen. And maybe in the final 5 minutes, ask them questions or say a few things. But the listening is really important. Just as you would want to know what kind of infection you're treating before you pull an antibiotic off the shelf and pop it, so you want to know what kinds of questions and pain somebody's going through before you attempt to step in and address it. So this sounds like the beginning of a bad joke, but I actually once had an experience. A Christian and 2 Buddhists walk into a bar. It's really true. I spoke.
Okay.
And I spoke at one of the wonderful meetings that Ezra Boggs and other people have organized down in the Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas area, called the Bible and Beer Consortium. It's a group of Christians and a group of atheists, and they hold events, and they bring people in to speak for those events. And I happen to be the Christian one of those times, and they hold them in bars, and they like their beer. And so here I was talking, and we're literally in a room in a bar, but then it's kind of open-ended on the fourth wall, and there are people out there who are just dining. When I was done, somebody came up to me and said, hey, there's a couple of people here. They didn't really actually come to hear you, but they're interested in talking with you. I said, all right, fine. Well, it turned out it was a young couple, guy and a girl. They were both professing to be Buddhists. I think she was a Buddhist because she had had a really charismatic comparative religion professor who had gotten her really hooked on Buddhism. I think the guy was a Buddhist because the girl was a Buddhist. That's the way it happens sometimes. And so I asked them after we chatted for a while, I said, if you were to be persuaded, whatever that would take, that Jesus of Nazareth died by crucifixion, was buried, and came back to life just a few days later, what would you do? I looked at the guy looked at the girl, and the girl said, well, that would be interesting, but I'm content with my values. I don't think it would change very much. And just in that moment, I discovered an argument for the resurrection, be it ever so wonderful, carefully rehearsed, tightly worded, impeccably argued, would have been beside the point.
Yeah.
And as I left a few minutes later, I heard another Christian at the table start taking up the argument for the resurrection. I just thought, oh, you missed the point. You just totally missed the point. So yeah, that listening thing and finding out where it is. There are a lot more people who will take an aspirin than there are people who will take vitamins. You take vitamins because somebody kind of persuaded you that they're good for you and you didn't forget today. But if you're in pain, pain reminds you now incessantly that you're in pain. And
Yeah.
you're much more likely to take something that addresses your pain than something that is in itself maybe good for your general health.
Right. So let me, if I may, I think we're getting far enough along here, kind of bring this around to some summary. Because what we're talking about is apologetics in the church. We're talking
Right.
about approaching it as apologists. Nothing we've said here, I hope, has diminished the importance of our knowing our business, knowing our arguments, knowing what we're talking about. That is still absolutely at the center of being good at what we do. But at the center also is the importance of coming in with a servant's heart, with a listening heart, with
Yeah.
the idea of building relationships, with the idea that the minister, that the pastor is the one who knows ministry. You're the one who knows apologetics. And finding a way to serve in the context of his ministry, recognizing that the kinds of changes that the church has to go through right now, as we have now shifted to living in a foreign mission field, are going to be brutally difficult
Right.
to do well. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be something we can say, oh, this is what you need to do. And just have them go, yeah, okay, I agree. Let's do that. It's not easy. It's so much of the world is, in terms of ministry, has become necessarily slower because the questions and issues have become so much more complicated. Furthermore, the change that a church needs to go through is not something in which we are skilled as apologists. And I want to tell you a dream that I've had for years, which is going to be hard to fulfill for me. But I've been working in this direction with some false starts for a while, 10 years, maybe even it goes back, where I have had the dream of bringing pastors together in some kind of a community where there's an apologist there too, where we can grapple with some of these questions of what does it take to reach our world the way our world is today in a foreign mission as it's become, and where I come in with my expertise in being less bewildered, and they share with one another their expertise in how to deal with the fact that the biggest giver doesn't want to change. And because that's something that only a pastor or maybe a professor, seminaries, that's something only they could do. I can't do that for them. But it seems like there ought to be some kind of an integrated, and I have wanted to do this online. I've wanted to do it locally. I've had false starts on it. It is still my dream. It is a dream which this will come as a shock to some people. A dream which is looking out of reach for me now. As I was recently diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. I still dream of the day when pastors connect with each other and with people who are slightly less bewildered to help figure this out. And I have wanted to build it. God or Satan has blocked it, unless God heals and something comes along that gives me more opportunity. But I live in Dayton, where we have a group called the Apologetics Fellowship, which I co-founded, and another group that's spin off from it, Dayton Apologetics. And Dayton Apologetics in particular has been powerful in bringing new conferences. And we've had small groups form, but more and more conferences have been coming here. It's amazing. Like, we're in the middle of nowhere. And yet, Greg Kokel, Lisa Childers, Natasha Crane, Frank Turek, Brett Kunkel, and others have just, Sean McDowell, I think, may be coming. I'm not committing you, Sean, because I'm not sure of that. But it's been so good. And yet, as I talk with them, I say, it's not enough. Conferences are really what we have seen as the epitome, the peak, the pinnacle of apologetics ministry, but it's not enough until it's integrated into the church. And if someone else can pick up my dream and say, how can we figure out how to integrate this into the church? Please go for it. And I think it's going to involve pastors together, along with someone who's less bewildered.
It's amazing how little I have to add to that, Tom. I think you're completely right.
Yeah, and that's, I dropped a bomb in there.
Yeah.
It was, pardon me, it was a bomb dropped on me. Just 3 weeks after I was saying I'm the healthiest I've ever been in my life. But it's a dangerous cancer.
But the
My
work goes
dream,
on.
my legacy, my hope is to see the church wake up to the foreign mission field we are in and discover that we still have the resources in community with one another to move forward and make the difference in this world for Jesus Christ.
The work goes on.
Yeah.
And we just need to have more people wake up and recognize what the nature of the challenge is and what it takes to rise to that challenge. There are people who are willing. It's a matter now of equipping them properly, connecting them correctly, and then relying on the Holy Spirit to help people to learn and take away the things from those necessary conversations that they should, so as to become more effective at ministry. And really, maybe if there's sort of one way I would sum this up, it is apologetics is ministry. And in the phrase apologetics ministry, we need to focus more than we have heretofore on the ministry side of things, not because it's not good to be prepared, not because
Right.
it's not good to have an answer, but because all the answers in the world won't connect with the problems unless you're viewing it as a ministry issue.
Unless you're there to serve. So go out and serve.
And listen.
Prepare yourself and serve.